Welcome guys to another day of workshop. Today we will be learning to use the Angular framework. This will help us write dynamic websites and also help us to create mobile applications. I believe all of us have installed Node.js, Visual Code Studio and Angular on their systems. Also, I believe everyone has created their Hello World application. So let us begin today's session. What is Angular? Angular is an open source model view controller framework, which is similar to the JavaScript framework. I won't use complicated technical jargon. Let me try to state what exactly Angular is using simple words. Angular is an excellent framework for building interactive websites. It is an open source framework developed by Google and used by most of the developers across the globe. Since its inception in 2009, it has been one of the most popular and efficient Java framework. Angular is a structural framework designed to simplify the development of a website's front end. Angular is probably one of the most popular modern day web frameworks available today. And one of the main reasons for the popularity of Angular is that it lets you use HTML as a template language. While HTML is a great declarative language for documents, it is not very efficient for applications. Angular extends the capability of HTML by allowing you to modify different elements of your web page. So the question arises, why should we use Angular? The approach to create static web pages and dynamic web pages is very different. In a static web page, the structure of the website is predefined. Hence, we can directly write the HTML elements for static websites. But when writing dynamic websites, we have to create elements dynamically using JavaScript and would prefer to reuse our code. This is efficiently handled by Angular. For writing our code in Angular, we have to use the TypeScript language. But browsers are only able to understand HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Angular simply provides wrapper over the basic HTML and JS code to make our life easier. So now that we know what Angular is and why we should use it, let us begin with Angular. By the end of this session, you will be comfortably making any web page using this framework. For simplicity's sake, we would be creating the same homepage using Angular. Even though the homepage is static, we will get an idea how Angular can be used to create dynamic web pages. Coming to the contents of today's session, first, we'll be building the Hello World application. I believe everyone has already done this step. Next, we'll have a look into why we need Angular. I'll go in depth on why we need Angular. I've already given you some idea. Next, we'll have an introduction to TypeScript. Next, directives, routing, and HTTP client. You'll get to know about these once we get there. Let's get started with Hello World. Using some simple commands, we can make a basic Angular app if you have all the requirements installed. So the first command is npm install -g Angular CLI. What this statement does is it installs Angular using the Node package manager globally, which allows us to use Angular in any directory inside our system. After that, you can use Angular or ng to create a new project. The name of the project here is Hello App. This will create a new folder in the directory where you run this command. The name would be the same as the project name, which is Hello App. Once you enter the folder using this command, you can run ngserve open. This command will launch our application on our local machine's browser. You will see that the URL is displayed once the command runs. Here, your application is running on this URL. Localhost is your machine. This is the default page which opens. As all of you have already executed these commands, so next, let us have a look at more features of Angular which make it attractive to developers. I will just show you how the Visual Studio editor and the Hello app homepage would look when you just start the application. I have already run the ngserve open command. So let's see some more advantages of Angular. As I have told you before, there are various advantages of using Angular. Some of those have been listed in this slide. Let's understand these one by one. So first is the MVC architecture. It is a software design pattern for developing web applications. A model view controller pattern is made up of the following three parts. Model, it is responsible for maintaining data. View, it displays all or a portion of the data to the user. Controller, it is a software code that controls the interactions between the model and the view. The controller receives all requests for the application and then works with the model to prepare any data needed by the view. The view then uses the data prepared by the controller to generate a final presentable response. To get a more in-depth feeling about what MVC is, please have a look at the Medium link given in the description. So next is TypeScript. TypeScript is an open source programming language developed by Microsoft that compiles to JavaScript. Since its release in 2012, the language has remained in active development and continues to gain in popularity every year. TypeScript doesn't alter JavaScript, instead expanding it with new valuable features. Everything that can be written in JavaScript can also be written in TypeScript, but also the main benefit of TypeScript is that it offers the ability to add static types to your JavaScript code. Angular is supported by Google. A dedicated team maintains and adds features which gives Angular framework a little edge over other frameworks. Next is Ionic support. The most exciting part of the workshop is to make a mobile application from web code. And for that, we will use Ionic, which is a powerful framework that helps you build native feeling mobile apps using web technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And the best part is it also supports Angular, and hence the web page developed using Angular can be converted to a mobile application. So next, let's have an introduction to TypeScript. TypeScript was developed to handle the problems with plain JavaScript, like scope management. In JavaScript, if a variable is declared in a function, its value can be used even outside the function. This can cause a lot of bugs while runtime in big applications. To take care of these problems, TypeScript was developed. Let us start writing a basic code in TypeScript. We will also see how Angular interacts with TypeScript to create dynamic websites. We will have a look at declaring variables, if-else conditions in TypeScript, for loops in TypeScript, and functions in TypeScript. So this was our Hello application. Just a moment. And this was the view of our Angular web page. First of all, let's go inside the source directory. And inside source, let's get inside the app directory. In here, you can see a lot of files. You don't need to worry about these. You will be interacting with a few files, and that's it. Mostly in this session, we'll be interacting with only 3 or 4 files. So inside the app directory, go to the app.component.html file. There is a lot of code here. You can directly delete it and save it. Once you save, this page is automatically loaded, and you can see as our HTML file is empty, hence the web page is also empty now. So whatever we write here would be displayed here. Let's have a look at the app component.ts file. This is the main controller. You have seen that the template URL is appcomponent.html. So appcomponent.html is displayed on this web page. For styles, all styles you want to apply to this HTML can be set in appcomponent.css file. So, and if you want to change the contents of this HTML file, we'll be using this app component class. First of all, let's get a feel about TypeScript, how to declare variables using TypeScript. Then we'll see how Angular helps us to create dynamic websites. First of all, inside a class, just like in C++, you can create public, private, and protected variables. So to define a variable, you have to set public variable, private variable, and a protected variable. You don't need to concern yourself with protected variables because we won't be inheriting classes. If you don't know what inheritance is, you don't need to worry here. Public and private just decide the scope of these variables. If this class has an object, then that object can directly access these public variables, whereas it cannot access private variables. If you don't understand this, then you need not be afraid, as we'll be writing most of our code inside this class itself. So public and private won't matter much to us. Let's keep our variables public. So we have a public variable now. Like all programming languages, we can create a constructor. For creating a constructor, the syntax is simple. You can write constructor, apply simple brackets, and that's it. So a constructor is a function which is called when the object of the class is created. A function is just a piece of code which you want to reuse. So we have a constructor. Inside the constructor, you can define variables using 3 types. So the first is var, the second is let, and the third is constant or const. So in JavaScript, we saw that we can create variables using the var keyword. So a variable can be initialized like var x is equal to, let's say, 0. The let keyword and the constant keyword are specific to TypeScript. So let's first see how to declare variables using let and constant, and then we will discuss the differences between these 3 keywords. So I'll say let y is equal to 0 and let z is equal to 0. So you can see that the way of declaring these variables is very similar, just the keywords have changed. Now what is the difference between these 3 keywords? So Let's start with constant. If a constant variable has been declared, then the value of that cannot be changed. So if I do z equal to 1, then it will give an error. So you can hover over and you will be able to see that, just a second, constant assigned to z because it is a constant. So cannot assign to z because it is a constant. So a variable declared using the constant keyword cannot be changed later on. This is really nice because sometimes you don't want to accidentally change the value of a variable, and this keyword lets you do that. Next, let's have an understanding of what the let keyword and the var keywords do. Using both of these, you can declare variables whose values can be changed. So you can do x equal to 1 and y equal to 1. Both of these codes are okay. The difference is that if you define y inside a scope, let's say I define this inside this scope. So let y is equal to 0. I'll be removing this from here. So, and I do y equal to 1. If I try to use y here, let's say y equal to 2, this will give me an error because y was defined inside this scope. So y is not available outside that scope. But if I define var x inside another scope, still I will be able to use the variable x outside the scope. Why? So let gives you a block level scope, whereas var gives you a function level scope. So you should try to avoid using var because if you write, let's say, 1,000-line code and you have declared a variable using var, then you won't be able to manage if the value of this x is changed in another scope. Trying to manage such a big code base and having a var variable in that can cause some real-time problems. To avoid that, you should always use let. So you can see that var keyword is forbidden. This error is shown because we are using the Angular Essential extension. So try to avoid using var as much as possible. So now that we are familiar with how to declare variables inside the class and inside a function, let's get to if-else conditions in TypeScript. Just like C++, we can have if-else conditions in our code. Let's remove this y and this variable x here. Let's set our constant z to true. Now I can put an if-else condition like this. If z equal to true, then you want to execute this piece of code. Let's define y outside the current scope. So if z is equal to true, then y will be 1. So currently, as we have set the constant z value to true, this will always be executed. But many a times, this if condition would depend upon the user input. If the user types something, let's say in the input, the user typed y, then you'll want to execute some piece of code. Else, if the user types something different, let's say n, then you'll want to run some other piece of code. You can do this by using else if command. And if you want to set a default piece of code that should be run if no conditions are met, then you can use the else command. So this is how if, else if, and else work in TypeScript. Now, we haven't been able to see the results, what we have been doing inside this TypeScript. For visualizing the results, you can either do console.log just as in JavaScript. So here we can do else block. Here we'll be writing console.log else if block. And here, let's print on the console if block. I'll save this file and it compiled successfully. Automatically, this web page was reloaded. Let's press F12. And so this, you can see it was displayed here if block. So as Z is true, so first let's get an idea on how this command was run or what was the sequence of the Angular application. First, an object of this app component was initialized. When this app component was initialized, this constructor was called. The constant z equal to true command was run, and then we had a comparison whether if z is true. As z was true, this console.log if block was executed. So you can see the if block here. If you put z equal to false, then we will be able to see else if block in the console. I have saved it, it automatically reloaded, and you can see now it's an else if block. Let's say constant z is equal to 3, z equal to 1, and z equal to 2. So if z is equal to 1, we'll be printing if block. If z equal to 2, then we'll be printing else if block, else we'll be printing else block. Let's save this. And you can see now we have an else block. This is how if, else if, and else work in TypeScript. One more way to visualize our results in TypeScript would be to use Angular to dynamically change this website. Let's open the app component.html file, which we have specified here. So I'll open this. We have completely removed whatever was present inside this file. Let's create two curly braces and write a variable name. Let's say some text. You can see there is an error here that some text is not defined. This is a variable, even though it is an HTML file. Angular, if you write something inside the curly braces, it treats it as a variable. Let's define the variable here. Public some text is equal to empty. So this is an empty string. So let's save this app component.ts and also app component.html. You can't see anything here because some text is empty. Let's put some text as some initial text and save it. Now you can see that some initial text is displayed in the HTML page. This is very different from the way we usually code our HTML. Usually, we can write some initial text directly in the HTML, but using Angular, we can define a variable and show the contents of the variable in the HTML. So that allows us to control the HTML view. Now, using our if-else condition, let's change the contents of some text. I'll set some text to if block. If the code inside the if block runs, you can see the error, some text is not defined. If you want to access the class specific variables, then you have to use this dot some text. So using this, we can access the variable some text. I'll just copy paste this, change it to else if block, and here to else block. So now, as z is equal to 3, the if and the else if conditions are false. Hence, the else condition will be executed and our some text variable will be set to else block. Let's save this file. And now you can see that our text has also changed to else block. What happens is, first of all, an initial object of app component is created. Then the constructor function is called. Then these commands are executed. Before the constructor is called, these static variables are also defined. So the value of some text is automatically set to some initial text. But as the constructor is run in real time, we are not able to see some initial text here as these commands run very fast. So we directly see that this dot some text has been changed to else block, and that is displayed over here. So you can keep on changing some text based on user input, and you can display different things which you want on the HTML page. This allows you to dynamically create your web page. Now that we know how to display our variables using Angular, let's see how for loop works in TypeScript. First of all, let's create a list. So I'll be creating some list is equal to this. We can keep on appending whatever items we want inside this list. In constructor, to append to this list, I'll be using a for loop. Very similar to a C++ for loop, we can first write a for, then a basic bracket. Inside for, you have to first define a variable over which you want to iterate. So I'll be using the let keyword to define our variable. Let's say I. I'll initialize it to the value 0. Next, I will check the condition I is less than 3 and then increment I after every loop. If you are familiar with C++, then this won't be too hard to understand. For those who need a quick revision, so let I equal to 0 defines the variable I with value 0. Next, this condition is checked. So I is less than 3, which is true, as 0 is less than 3. Then the commands inside the for loop are executed as the condition was true. After the expressions inside the for loop are evaluated, our I is incremented. After incrementing I, again the condition is checked, which will be true as I would be 1, and again the contents inside the for loop are executed. This keeps on happening till the condition is not false. So that is how a for loop works. Inside the for loop, I will append some items to the list. So this dot sum list dot push. Let's say I want to push I. So now this dot sum list would contain 0, 1, and 2. Let's see this using console.log. So I have saved this TS file, and you can see in the browser console, you can see an array of size 3 having the values 0, 1, and 2. If you don't want to use the console to see this, you can use Angular to visualize the contents of the list. You can go here, create two curly braces, and then some list of 0. By using square brackets and 0, you say you want to access the first element of some list. And similarly, I can so now saving this, you can see else block 0, 1, 2. If you remember, in HTML, having an enter here does not mean we will see an enter in the HTML page. To create an enter, you have to use the BR tag. So now you can see there a new line has been added, and 0, 1, and 2 are the values of the list. So now that you are familiar with for loop, let's have a look at functions in TypeScript. We already have seen a function named constructor in this, but constructor is a predefined keyword which can only be used to define the constructor to the class, which automatically runs when the object to the class is created. If you want to define a function which is not the constructor, then you can simply write the name of the function, then add simple brackets, and then in curly brackets, you can add the piece of code you want to execute when this function is called. So you can add here let x equal to 1 and write the same code just as in the constructor. Functions are really useful as you can reuse those codes whenever you want. So that's it about functions. One more thing is that you can have some arguments to the function as well. So in my function, you can pass some, let's say, a variable named value. I'll call this function from our constructor, my function of 2. So this will call the function, my function, with the value of 2. Let's print this value on the console. If you want to again reuse the function, you can just call this dot my function of 3. Once I save it, you can see that 2 and 3 were printed on the console. So whenever you have, let's say, 100 lines of code and you want to keep on reusing it multiple times, it's better to write a function. So now you have a basic knowledge of TypeScript. Don't get afraid of these codes. You will get familiar as you use them. and you will be using this a lot to create dynamic websites. Next, let's move on to Angular directives. Yeah, so Angular directives. Angular directives are used to extend the power of the HTML by giving it a new syntax. It manipulates the DOM by changing its behavior and appearance. There are many directives and we can learn as and when required, but some of those which will be used more frequently have been listed here. So some structural directives are ngIf and ngFor. Some attribute directives are ngClass, ngStyle, and ngModel. Let's have a look at each of them individually. Just a moment. Yeah, so we have the code which we have been writing over here. What if we want to display a division which says I am admin? I'll remove the current text. Better yet to just comment this. So here we can see that I am admin text is displayed. What if we only want to display I am admin when the user is admin? Otherwise, we don't want to display anything. So you can, let's say, get whether the user is a admin or a customer from the server or some database. Once we have that, let's say inside the constructor, I have created a variable is admin. Better, I should actually define this outside. So public is admin, and in the constructor, after getting the value from, let's say, a server, I want to set this dot is admin is false. Then if is admin is false, I don't want I am admin to be shown. This can be done using the ngIf directive. So in ngIf, so all directives start with the star asterisk character. So ngIf is equal to, here I will write the variable name is admin. If this is true, then this division will be displayed. So let's save this, and you can see as is admin is set to false, we don't see I am admin over here. If I set this to true and save the TypeScript, right? You can see I am admin is shown here now. So based on the user, you can change the way the website looks using this ngIf directive. This is a really useful directive, and you will be using it a lot if you write a dynamic website. Next, let's have a look at the ngFor directive. So let's say you have a list which has the content 0, 1, and 2. What you want to do is display the values inside this list in a structured and in a specific style. So you will be creating a div which has, let's say, some styles, which is the margin top should be 100, or let's say 50 pixels, a background color of 333 and a text color of, let's say, white. So let's say we have our division like this. We want each component of the list to have the same styles. We can do this. Sum list of 0, then copy the same div, create a new one and put sum list of 1 and have here sum list of 2. You can see we have the divisions displayed over here. It does not look pretty, but I just want to show you the concept right now. If you want it to look pretty, let's work on it a bit. So first of all, as we are reusing the styles, we should define it inside a class. We can define the class inside app_component.css. So I'll define dot my class as background to be 333, color to be white, and margin top to be 50 px. Let's set the padding to be 10 px. Now let's apply this class to all the divisions. I'll remove the style and apply a class, my class. Let's replace all of these divisions by the class. Let's save this. Now you can see that using our class, which we defined in app_component.css, we can reuse the styles. Now, but what will happen in a dynamic website is that you don't actually know how many items would be present in the list. So you can't define the HTML like this. What you'll need to do is create new divisions based on the data you fetch from the server. If you remember, in JavaScript, we created new buttons and deleted those buttons using JavaScript. We created the element button, added some classes and style and text to the button, and then pushed it as a child to an empty division. That is the way to do it using JavaScript. But Angular provides us with a way better method. We can use the ng for directive to do that. Let's see. So first, you use the asterisk command to specify a directive. Next, I have written ng for. Inside it, I'll write let item of some list. So we are iterating over some list, and the value of the current iteration is saved inside item. So item would currently take 0, 1, and 2 value. If you want to show the item, you can directly put item over here. Let's remove these extra classes and let's save this. You can see now that using the ng for directive, we have created the same amount of the same view which we had earlier using same 3 lines of code. If you want to extend this, you have to just change the value of the list. Let's say I add a 3 and a 4 also. So you can see Automatically, the third and the fourth rows have also been added. You should not get confused that this is an index. You can easily add a 10 or a 100 over here. So in HTML, the value of the item would first be 10, then 100, then 2, then 3, then 4. All of those divisions would have the same class, which is my class. That is how you use ng for. One more additional information is that if you want to get the index of the item, you can set let my index is equal to index. So my index currently contains the index of the item. If you want to visualize that also, you can show this using Angular. So now you can see 10, 0, 100, 1, 2, 2, and so on. That is how you can access the index. If you want to access more variables, you can have a look at the documentation of Angular. So that is it for ng4. Here we have covered the important structural directives. Let's have a look at some of the attribute directives. Structural directives are called so because they change the structure of the HTML layout, while the attribute directives just change the way the current structure is viewed. More specifically, they change the CSS of the current structure, or they can be used to get the value currently held inside the current structure. To get more clarity, let's have a look at the code. First, we'll have a look at the ng class directive. Let's say we have a div so you can apply multiple directives to the same div. Let's apply our ng class directive. Here, as this is not a structured directive, you don't need the asterisk mark. So inside ng class, let's put our own variable. So inside curly braces, I will put a some list of classes. You can see an error over here that some list of classes is not defined. So let's define this inside the app.component.ts. So some list of classes will actually be a string which, let's say, contains my class. So, and that's it. If I save this, I'll be reducing this sum list. So let's say just one. And let's save this app.component.html also. You can see that I am admin text also has the my class CSS attributes now. Using ng class, you can dynamically change the class applied to a division. By the way, you can use these directives on any element, on any HTML element. You don't need to apply these on the div element. So if you change the string to, let's say, some other class, you obviously need to first define some other class. Let's say I apply a text align center to this class and I save the TS file also. You can see that the other class has also been applied. So based on user interaction, you can change the color and the styles applied to a division. This way, you can change the website's dark mode or light mode. If a user presses a button, you can get the event inside the TypeScript code, and in that event, you can change the class, and all the colors present on the website can be changed. So now that we have done with ng class, let's have a look at ng style. Ng style is also very similar to ng class. I have created a copy of I am admin. Instead of using ng class, let's use ng style. Currently, don't worry about square brackets. You can just memorize that to use ng style, you should have a square bracket. Next, let's first create a dictionary which has the key margin top as my margin top. You can see that it's giving an error that my margin top is not defined. Let's first define my margin top over here. So I have defined my margin top as, let's say I'll change the value to 100. Now, you must have noticed that I haven't specified px over here. Usually, whatever units, or like we need to have some units when we are defining the CSS attributes. It can be in pixels, it can be in percentage. So how do we set the units while using ng style? So you have to write margin top dot px to set the unit as pixels over here. Let's save this. You can see that I am admin is applied over here, but margin top is not yet applied. Let's have a look why that's happening. So okay, that's because of a text error. Instead of margin, I have typed margin. Let's save this. And yeah, you can see now there is a quite big margin, which is of 100 px. If you notice, it is double the margin applied to I am admin. So that is how you apply styles. If you want to add another style, you can add it by putting a comma, then a text. Okay, that's not how you do it. So I'll have a look at it later and tell you how to apply multiple styles using ng style. So next, let's have a look at ng model. ng model is used to access the data which the user puts in the HTML page. Currently, we have seen how to put the data available inside TS in the HTML page. We can use that by using two curly braces. But if there is an input command, input element, let's say input type equal to text. So we have an input element over here. I'm typing something over here. How do we access the value of the text I am typing in the TS file? So let's do that using the ng model directive. First, let's create an element and a variable which will store our text. Store text. I'll initialize it as an empty string. So I have store text over here. To visualize how stored text will change, let's just show it in HTML. So, okay, it's store text. So as store text is currently empty, we don't see anything here. Now we have to bind the value which we put inside the input to this variable. We can do this by using the ng model directive. To use this ng model directive, this is the syntax. And in equal to, you set the name of the variable in which you want to store the text. So you'll be getting some error that can't bind to ng model since it's not a known property of input. This error is happening because we have not included ng model. By default, ng for and ng if directives are accessible, but to use ng model, you have to first import it. So let's see how to import it. First, open the app.module.ts file. Inside that, you can see that already a lot of components or predefined modules have been imported. We want to import ng model which is present inside @Angular forms. From Angular forms, we have imported ng model, and to use these models, you have to declare them inside imports. Now, as we have imported ng model and set it to the global imports, you can go back to app_component.html and just a moment. So here it should be small ng. Just a moment. Actually, it's not ng model, it's forms module. So to make ng model work, you have to import forms module and set it in imports. So now, as forms module has been imported, and we'll save the HTML file also. So now we don't get any error, and the ng model has binded our stored text to the value which we put in the input element. Let's see if everything is working fine. You can see as I am typing, the text available over here is also changing. So ng model stores the value inside store text, which we are displaying using Angular double curly braces store text. So you can even use the value of store text from app_component.ts. So the store text variable value is changing. If you want to, let's say, get something from the server based on what the person inputs, you can use ng model to do that. So that's it about ng models. Now you are familiar with the most commonly used directives in Angular. Knowing these directives, you can easily create dynamic websites. But let's see some more functions of Angular which will help us to even reuse HTML code. So now we are done with Angular directives. Let's go on to components and routing. In Angular, we can create reusable pieces of code. Just like we have classes in C++, in Angular, we have components. Components have an HTML file which is modified by the TypeScript code and can be reused by other components. It is the main building block of the Angular application. Even the app, the base we have been looking, has also been a component. Next, what are routes? Routes are definitions with at least a path and a component. The path here refers to the part of the URL that determines the unique view that should be displayed. View here is defined in the component associated. So you might want to display different web. The view you want to display is different based upon the URL the person visits. Let's say on just a slash path, you want to display home, whereas on slash login path, you want to display the login page. You can do this by redirecting the view to a different component based on the URL. This is all done by routing. Let's see how do we do routing later on while we are building our own homepage using Angular. Next is the HTTP client. We won't be seeing the code related to HTTP client, but let me give you an idea about how HTTP client works. Most front-end applications need to communicate with the server to get data and display it on the UI. This is done over the HTTP protocol. HTTP client is a library which Angular provides that helps us get external data or post some data to the server. As it can be a bit challenging for beginners to understand, we won't be covering it in this session. So next, let's start building our homepage using Angular. We will be recreating the same homepage, which is static, but I believe you will get a good idea of how to make a dynamic website while creating the static website in Angular. So I believe everyone, while creating the new project, um, said yes when routing was to be imported. So as we chose yes for importing routing, you can see two imports. App routing, just this actually, app routing module is already imported and set in the imports. Let's first delete all the things we have done till now. And let's start building our own homepage. So first of all, what I'll do is, by default, we have already created a static homepage. I'll copy some of the code which we had done earlier. Just give me a moment. So this was the code which we had written earlier. Just a moment. Yeah. So first of all, what we want to do is inside Angular, we want to use Bootstrap. How to do that? Let's copy our imports. In this base directory, you will see an index.html file. So it's actually inside the source directory. So inside source directory, you can see the index.html file. So in that, this is the head of the web page you will be seeing. Let's add our imports over here. So I have added the bootstrap imports over here. We also want to put this style, which we'll be using globally, inside the Angular code. If you put the style inside app.component.css, then it will only be accessible to app. If you create something inside it, it might not be accessible to the components which we use inside the app. We will see how to create more components later on. So first of all, we want to apply these styles globally. We can do that inside the styles.css file found. You can see there is a comment that you can add global styles to this file. Let's add our global styles over here. Next, we can use this code to set the image on the title bar. So first of all, remove this favicon.ico and copy paste our own code. Now you can see that the href, first of all, I'll hide this. So you can see that the href is stating to find the picture in the static folder, but we don't have the static folder inside our Angular project. But what we have is the assets folder. Let's copy all our images inside the static folder. I'll be copying it directly from my folder view. Give me just a moment. So I've navigated to the source folder, inside which there's the assets. It's currently empty right now. I'll paste all the images over here. You can see inside Visual Studio Code, I have now the images folder. So now the href should be assets slash images slash profile. No, it should just be profile circular.png. Actually, the name is profile circular favl.png. You can see Visual Store is giving me a suggestion also. So that's it. Let's actually have a look whether this is working. So now you can see I have my photo on the title bar. The name is still Hello App. So let's change the title to my home page. Let's save it. So you can see that the title has changed to my home page. Further, let's import the font awesome library. That's done. Already the viewport has been set. So we don't need to set the viewport. You can add these optional meta tags. The title we have already set. You can ignore this, as this is the some code used for seeing how many people have visited your website. You can Google on about Google Analytics, which does this for you. I won't be going over here, but it's a very simple process where you get a piece of code which you have to copy and paste inside the head of your website. So now that we have copied the content inside the head, let's save this. Next, let's have a view about how the page looks. So currently we don't have any content inside our app component.html. So it's looking blank. Let's add our content. So if you remember, our website looked like this. Just a moment. Yeah. So in whichever tag we went, whichever URL we went, the name, the navigation bar, and the introduction or information about myself was fixed. The content only changed in the cards. So what we'll want is to have the style of the background, the header, the navigation bar, and our information to be static in all web pages, and based upon the URL, we want to change the content shown over here. Let's see how to do that. So first, in whatever we put inside app component.html is universal or global. So we'll want to put our background and our information about ourselves and the header inside app component.html. Let's have a look on how to do that. So we'll just plainly copy and paste the header code. So this was the header code, the Mayank Kumar's thing, which is the head, and these are the navigation barcode. If you don't remember this, you can go back and have a look at the page which we made earlier in HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap. Let's save this and have a look on how our website looks. So this is how our website is currently looking. If we add the content, then we'll be able to see the white and our profile also. Let's start adding our content in this view. So this is the content which was shown in the base, in the home page. I want this to be dynamically added depending upon the URL. So I won't be adding this here right now, but this content is my information content, my profile pic circular, and information about myself. This is the contact card. I want this to be present in all views. So I'll copy paste this code. I'll save it. Let's have a look at how it looks. So the images are not loading because the URL is wrong. So here I have set the images to just images. It should actually be assets/images. Let's save this. You can see that my image was loaded. I'll remove these cards. So this is the card. So you can see our Angular web page now has the header, the navigation bar, and my information as a static in whatever profile I am present. I believe this profile link would also have the same content. We have not yet defined the routing. That's why all clicks to the profile or the research or latest are redirected to the home page. we'll be defining the profile view later on. First of all, let's see how to dynamically add the content over here based upon our view. So first of all, we'll have this is the place where we want to add our content here. To do that, you need to have a router outlet empty tag over there. You can see Visual Studio Code is giving me the suggestion. So yeah, now I have my empty router outlet component over there. So now if I use the router module to change my current component, all of the code would be visible inside this router outlet div. So the content outside the router outlet would be visible in all web pages. Let's save this. Now let's see how to first add a component. I'll create a new terminal and then ng generate component. Let's say I want to create the profile view. So I'll add profile. Let's wait for the profile to be created. We can see the profile was created and a new folder has been added over here inside the app folder. Just a moment. Yeah. So this profile folder now contains the profile.component.css, profile.component.html, and the profile component.ts file. You should not be concerned about what profile.component.spec.ts is right now. So this is very similar to the app component we had. This app, whatever logic we want to put should be put in the TS file, and the HTML file can be dynamically changed using the component.ts file. So you can see that the constructor has already been initialized here, like basic constructor code has been written. Also, we have a ng on init function. This is also called when the class is visible. The difference between constructor and ng on init is that constructor is called when the class is first initialized, whereas ng on init runs when the model comes into view. More or less, the function of these two, the utility of these two functions are the same. So we have created the profile. Let's go to approuting.module.ts. We want to add a route over here. Let's see how to do that. So we want to add the logic that if we go to localhost 4200/profile, then our profile component should be displayed inside the routing outlet. So to do that, you need to create the routes over here. So first of all, we'll add the route, that path. If it's empty, then we should use we should redirect to home. We have to yet create the home component, but let's, instead of keeping it empty, let's always redirect the empty path to the home component, where we will define how the home page should look. And path match, let's keep it to full. You don't need to concern about what this path match and all are. What I'm doing is, if the path is empty, then I'm redirected to home. Next, we'll have to define what should happen when I'm when I go to the home URL. So we have to set path home. If the path is home, then open the component home component. So just a moment. Yeah. So home component should actually not be string. It should be just home component. So we are getting the error as home component is not yet defined. So first for that, we need to create a home component. So ng generate component home. This has created a home component for us. Let's import the home component. So import from dot slash home slash home dot component. We want to import home component from here. So now you can see the error is gone, and we have created one more component named home. Let's also create the profile component. So I have set the path to profile, and here it should be profile component. You can see the extension we had applied earlier has automatically added profile component from profile.profile component. That's a really nice property. Now I have saved this, and you can see whenever I go to just a blank localhost 4200, I'll be redirected to slash home because of this route. If I click on profile, then it's also working, and you can see a profile works text coming over here. That's because the profile component.html has a paragraph with profile works text inside it, and that's being displayed in app component.html router outlet. So it's the same as a paragraph being over here that profile works. So all the code inside profile component.html is added over here if I go to localhost 4200 slash profile. It's the same for slash home. You can see there is a text here that home works. This is a by default text which is added when a component is created. Let's remove this home works text. So it's gone now. What we'll be doing is we'll be creating cards over here dynamically using Angular. As you already have some idea on how to display the cards, so we can have a variable named content heading, which will be a list, which first heading is header 1 and the second heading is header 2. So once we have this, in home component.html, we can create a div which has a class container, which has, let's say, we apply an ng for directive over that with let heading of content heading with class container. We have a row inside it. These are all bootstrap classes which we have included in index.html. I have a call over here. I will set the class as container and bg light, which will set the background as light. Let's have a margin of in the y-axis of 3, and I'll put the heading over here. Let's save this. So you can see now you have the heading and the heading 2 present over here. If you go to /home, if you go to profile, then this won't be visible. You can just see profile works. Let's go back to home. So now this component is visible. You can, using ng-for and defining variables over the home component.ts, dynamically create the content visible here. For a static page, this might seem too much work, but for a dynamic page, using JavaScript to create these components is very tedious. I'll give you a basic idea of how to create dynamically these components using JavaScript. So you can create an empty div with some ID. Let's say ID is equal to empty space. Let's say just empty. Inside home component.ts, in ng on init, first you'll have to create a variable. Let empty parent is equal to document dot get element by id empty. Now you will have to create a new element. Let new div is equal to document dot create element div. This is how you will create a new div. If you want to add a new class, then you will have to do new div dot class list dot add container space. We want to add a bg light and a my of 3. So this will put a margin in the y direction of 3. Next, you will now have to create a new row. So let new row is equal to document dot create element div. So new row will have a class list of row. You can see how tedious it is to just create a basic row and a column. The same code for a column would be there. Now, what we want to do, we want to nest the column inside the row and the row inside the div. To do this, you need to do new row dot append child new call. Then you need to append the row inside the new div. So append child new row. First, we want to add our text in the new column. So it will be new call dot inner HTML is equal to, let's say, content this dot content heading of 0. So now we have our new div which contains new row, which contains new column. We want to put this new div inside the empty parent. So empty parent dot append child new div. That is how you can create a new div using JavaScript. Let's save this. So let's have a look at, we are not able to see the code over here. Let's see why that's happening. So to debug, let's press F12. String contains an invalid character. That's the error. Let's see why this error is coming. Yeah, so we actually can't add multiple classes in a single line. So to add classes, we'll have to create 3 lines. One will contain the container, one will contain the BG light, and the other will contain the margin Y of 3. So now you can see that a new header 1 has been created. Now, if you want to create this as in a for loop, then you'll have to add the code for loop inside this. You can imagine that it will be very difficult to create a dynamic website using plain JavaScript. You can do it, but it's not preferable. Whereas simply such a small and neat code can be used to dynamically create your content in Angular. You can use the ngIf, ngFor, and other ngClass, ngStyle, and ngModel directives to make this look really good. One more feature of Angular is that it lets you reuse components. First of all, let's create a new component named card. So ng generate component content card. This will generate a new component named content card. I can inside the content card .component.html define a basic key that this is a content. I'll give it the style that its background color should be white and the text color, just color, should be black. So this is a basic content card. If you want to reuse this HTML code in multiple places, in home component.html, you can just do app, and you can see VS Code is giving me the suggestion app content card. If I apply this, then you can see this is a content coming over here. So ideally, you will want to create this code inside the content card, pass variables of what you want to be. Let's say you want to set the heading, which you'll get from home component.ts. You can pass that heading value inside app component card, and here you can access that variable to set the heading. Let's see how to do that. Just a moment. So let's open content card component.ts. Here we'll have to first define what all are the inputs that we'll be expecting. For that, this is the way to define an input. So input header is equal to, let's keep it empty right now. So we are expecting an input of header, which if it's not given, then its value will be empty. Let's save this. Now let's go back to our home component.html file where we used the app component card. Here now you can use the header element and pass equal to hello. Instead of the default, just a moment. Let's put header over here. You can see that hello is being displayed over here as we passed hello to the header value. So you can pass the heading, the link for the heading, last updated, and the content along with a button value with the image source URL to the content card. Receive those variables as string inside card component.ts and then bind it to the HTML file with an ng4 directive. Ngif, you can use your ngif, ng4, and so on, and you can create a nice looking card. You have to just write it once, and in home component.html, instead of creating a new row and a column, you will just need to define the app component card inside the ng4 loop. This way, you can easily create dynamic website. For a static website, I repeat that this might look too difficult compared to writing the static only HTML code, but there is an added advantage that whatever code we write using Angular can be directly converted to a mobile application using Ionic, which we'll be seeing in the next session. So Angular has two advantages. First, it lets you create a dynamic website. Second, the same code can be used to create a mobile app, an iOS app, and a Windows app as well. While we automatically get a browser, we get our own web page as well. So that's it about Angular. Yeah. Now we will again have a mentorship session so that you can clear all your doubts related to Angular. Kindly join the Zoom link sent to you via email.